Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh Ji. My name is Jasdip Singh. I work as a book and paper restorer, helping to run a charity called Pothi Seva, which preserves Pothi Sahibs, primarily connected to the Sikh tradition. I also assist in running a new charity called Virasati Asthan Seva, which is dedicated to the conservation of Asthans connected with the Sikh tradition. We are here in the chapel of Worcester College, Oxford, an 18th century building which has hundreds of fascinating wall paintings of the Victorian period. As well as these wall paintings, Worcester College has a rich association with English architectural history and houses some of the finest architectural drawings and plans which are connected to the neoclassical tradition. It is then fitting that the purpose of our gathering here is to explore the importance of studying and preserving images of the past, particularly in the form of wall paintings which were once a common sight in the architecture of Sikh Asthans. Images are sometimes seen as an addition, which can add a little bit of colour to history books, but we would like to discuss a small number of examples selected to show you how images can be studied in a more holistic manner, making connections to textual and material evidence to produce powerful visions of the past. Our two main participants in the discussion are Davinder Singh Toor and Dr. Resham Singh Toor. Davinder Singh Toor is an expert who has painstakingly helped to collect and preserve the material history of the Sikh and Punjabi past. Over the years, Davinder has very openly shared this collection with us all through exhibitions, books, lectures and presentations. Davinder's research and attention to detail has done a great deal to help connect us with our rich and complex past, and we are fortunate and grateful that he's taken time to join us today. And Dr. Resham Singh Toor is a medical doctor, Kirtani, historical researcher and all-round Vidwan. He first helped found Bhai Gurdas Educational Trust, which published a unique English translation of Kavi Santokh Singh's Shri Nanak Prakash. More recently, Resham Singh helped to found Virasati Asthan Seva, the organisation currently fundraising for the conservation of two important historical Asthans. One of the Asthans Virasati Asthan Seva is fundraising for is Gurdwara Baba Bikrama Singh Bedi in the Dab Vasti Ram area of Amritsar. This is a unique Asthan built in the memory of Baba Bikrama Singh Bedi, an important rebel leader in the Anglo-Sikh Wars. Baba Bikrama Singh was held captive by the British at this site and eventually passed their final breath here in 1863. Aside from its intrinsic historical importance, the Asthan has an incredible range of wall paintings which provide important evidence of an artistic tradition which began to disappear very rapidly, particularly during the second half of the 20th century. Virasati Asthan Seva, as already mentioned, is actively fundraising for the care of Sikh Asthans, and Gurdwara Baba Bikrama Singh is one of the projects we're fundraising for. In Punjabi, we can call this idea of conservation sambal. Restoration or preservation are words more commonly used in English. Davinder, you're best known as a researcher and someone who has helped to collect together perhaps one of the largest collections of Sikh and Punjabi heritage. What first motivated you to pursue your collection of Sikh and Punjabi heritage items?
Thanks for the invitation, and thanks for the question. Trying to go back, I think. I suppose when I was actually thinking about this not long ago, just trying to think about that first moment when you become interested or hooked or captivated, and I was actually remembering, this is way before I ever started collecting. I think some of my strongest memories are of going to Punjab when I was 9, 10, 11 years old with my mother. I was mostly only kind of with my mother traveling, and she was, very devout, and just going on like a Gurdwara kind of tour, endless Gurdwara tours, in fact, this historical circuit. And I think in those moments, looking back as a child, there's lots of silent time, lots of quiet time, lots of contemplation time, and periodically we might stop at a bookshop, and I'd buy a little book, which I would then, that would be my pre-iPad days. So you're reading your books while you're getting through your trip. So I think there was a deep connection in terms of history, culture, that we were immersed in physical heritage, material heritage, and art. I think, in whatever form it was, in those books or comic books or whatever I was reading. And then move forward, I think about sort of 10 years or so. It was my kind of first real interaction with what we now term kind of, fine art or antique art, whatever it is, but in museum spaces here in England. And I think your natural kind of interaction with that is almost kind of unspeakable, because you're looking at something very tangible, real in front of you. Suddenly, all of that history, all of those stories, those sakhis, all that philosophy is now being brought to life in these objects. And I think many of us, me included at that moment, weren't ever thinking about ownership of those things. They always belong to somebody else, already exist somewhere else, must be being preserved. And then the next kind of real eye-opening kind of moment is to find out that you can actually still find this heritage. It moves about. It changes ownership. You can find it in all sorts of places. And then the journey to kind of look for, search for, and collect. I think there was something in me that felt as if I needed to physically own some of these, and I've got to wrestle with that idea of ownership. But clearly there was something in me that was saying, well, actually, to be able to do something with this, I need to have it first. And I think that's where it really began. But I really think those really strong kind of hooking moments are probably when I was very young. And no, hardly any conversation happening between me and my mother on these trips, but all of it, you're kind of, you're immersed in something which then sows a seed. Yeah.
When you talk about ownership, quite an interesting concept. So you said that I felt, you can sometimes think that somebody else is going to take care of it, that it's not my purview, it's not within my remit. Somewhere along the line that switched for you. And you sort of said that, well, I felt the need to own it. I suppose when we own something, then we feel responsible for it. We look after it, we take care of it. And I'm just drawing parallels with our own experience suddenly into this conservation space where we're looking to conserve physical buildings. For a long time, a person might feel, well, this is beyond me. I don't have the skill set. What might drive it really is just passion. Yeah. And it seems to me that in your journey, that passion, that interest, that spark led you to find the avenues to ownership. Equally with us, could I have envisaged that we might be involved in some small way in taking back Asthans, sites of religious and cultural heritage that, sitting in England, it feels like we have no right to be involved with in some ways. But we are now, and I think we also have that shared sense of, well, this is collective ownership. Maybe we can talk about it a bit later, but your exhibitions also feed into that why do people of our heritage go to these things? What connects them? Well, this is collective ownership. But there always has to be someone who takes the helm forward. In your case, curating a wonderful, unique collection, probably the most comprehensive. In our case, somewhat happening across individuals, personalities in our community who also have that buy-in and working with them to execute in a way that builds ownership collectively.
Yeah, I think it's such an organic process. I think I kind of wrestle with the idea of how much of that we can nurture. Your choice in taking up, as you say, the helm with this restoration project, or me with collecting, how much of that did you actually choose? How much of that do I actually choose? Or are we literally just working moment by moment and suddenly find ourselves, you have the mindset that you push, you challenge, you do, that in itself helps you to take responsibility of something. But, we don't, I think what's really important in that is, not always needing necessarily to follow or be guided by someone or something. Like, let your passion just take you somewhere. And just a small kind of analogy. I remember reading in the biography of Jahangir, how Shah Jahan and Jahangir, they want to go on holiday to have their vacations up in Kashmir, but there's no road, so they build the road as they go. Right, they take all the supplies to build the road to their holiday destination, and I thought that's just thinking about that is I was quite kind of encouraging, really. And I think in many ways, I think that's what we do. I think we naturally, if you just immerse yourself in what you're passionate about, then something will come from that. So, and it doesn't leave any time wasting for complaining or waiting for someone else to do it. We can be the people that are doing it, so I think it comes from kind of deep. Yeah.
No, I like that. I kind of, even when I was sitting back and thinking, and Jasdip really was the one who helped herald this movement into what it is now, and we're just beginning as an organization. But the ultimate feeling was as if, well, why should I wait for somebody else to do it? If I have the passion, let's make a go of it. And even reaching out to you, Davinder, we were a bit like, shall we reach out to Davinder? He's got this exhibition going on, and you've built quite a wonderful reputation just off the work that you've done in the last couple of decades. And we were thinking to ourselves, shall we reach out to Davinder now? There's a bit of overlap in our topics and what we're doing. And we thought, well, why not? Let's just reach out. And you were most gracious in accepting our invitation. So it's really lovely to have you with us as well.
Honestly, truly, it's my privilege. And I think, first of all, I really want to emphasize how much of a team effort it is to get to the places that we've got to. And I think, people might see me or, hear my name attached to the collection, but behind that is lots of research. It's a huge team, with the exhibition, with the museum, publishers, Kashi House, people like that. There's lots of people that we're relying on. And I think what I find really exciting, actually, and I've been reading and hearing about the work that you've been doing, hence why, it's a joy for me and a privilege for me to be here. What I find really exciting about the space that we're in is that, we've explored different disciplines, but there's an overarching, there's an overlap, and there's common ground, and the principles are essentially the same, but, no one person can do all the things, whether it's music, or manuscript conservation, or architecture, or other types of physical material heritage like what I'm involved in. I think that's really, really encouraging, and actually also a really efficient way of doing it. It's we almost need to have this structure in place that we have kind of a kind of alignment of all the efficiencies, so I think it'll make it far more productive. So.
Oh yeah, so if I want to sort of connect to that, you mentioned the word like overarching. What is the overarching thing which connects us? Like there's a word in there, arch. Arch comes from building, and this connects us to the concept of an Asthan. An Asthan is a word which was is used regularly in Punjabi. You can hear it in Gurdwaras. Guru Nanak Dev Ji da Asthan siga, Hazur Sahib ka Asthan hai, but until maybe like a few years ago, we didn't really think about what an Asthan actually is. It was our conversations, myself and Resham and others too, we started to think about this idea of what an Asthan is. Why is this such a significant thing? And we began to realize that what makes it important is that it is that the, how can you say, it's the connection point which brings these different sort of fields together.
Do we know do we know what the root of that word is?
Tar. So I mean, it's tar would be coming from Sanskrit.
Well, you have. I mean, I'm just thinking flippantly now, but the word that I think that comes closest is astul, and astul means physical. Yeah. If we think about astul and suksham being subtle, so ast is probably some sort of physicality.
Definitely
Is the root word.
like sthiyate, like to stand still in Sanskrit. So
Something to be
to be still.
steady.
Yeah, so it's a point, and it's a point we've sort of like in developing this philosophy. It's a space which consists of some physical remnants which are connected to the past, which may be deriving from a physical event, from an individual, a movement, a conversation, even sometimes. It could be a plant, it could be a tree, it could be a weapon, it could be a shastra, but there's something physical there which results in the production of often some kind of building. And then that building begins to like house Sikh or Sangat, you can say, who come together. There has to be some aspect of some like Naam or Kirtan or Bhajan or Bandagi connected to that often. And then other sort of practices, different types of seva, different types of artistic musical production. All these things come. It's basically what we dream of. Like when I sort of look at, like, you can say, I suppose, like especially younger generation Sikh, people have this dream of seeing everything that they dream of in one situation. People who are very much into kirtan, they want to see the historic kirtan. People who are into paintings, they want to see the paintings, and they all want to see in this one space. But which space doesn't necessarily.
Let me ask a challenging question, if I can. Do you think it's a dream that even existed? Do you think that it's a romantic idea that we are lured by? Like, is it something that when we talk about conservation of the Asthan that you're working on at the moment, how much of that do you think is, and I'm asking this of myself too, but how much of that is an idea that this once existed in that way that you described? Because what you describe is paradise, basically. Like it's a place that we all yearn to kind of be in. Like, so are we conserving something to restore it? And if it's being restored, then it once was in the way that you described, do you think?
I think it's like a dream is something which for a brief moment exists. It's while it's there, it's real. And if it's there in your memory, any practice which you can do to rekindle that, it brings it back to life. If you think of, like, in Sikh history, this concept of Guru Gobind Singh Ji's Darbar is a powerful one, which you can say was never in a completely stable state, was always like shifting, various like battles and sieges and things. It was not a perfectly stable thing, but the experience of it was powerful enough that time and time again, during the time of Guru Gobind Singh Ji and subsequently, Sikh kept trying to sort of like remake this kind of this feeling of a darbar. And we can never say that there was a perfectly stable moment when it was all completely harmonious, and it kept going like that for a while. But it was a fleeting sort of feeling that was enough, you can say. Which for us is what we're trying to sort of plug into. But on a more tangible level, Asthans are like spaces which have helped preserve a lot of Sikh Virasati, you can say.
What's the, for both me and the listener, what's the distinction between Asthan, Dharamsala, and Gurdwara? Nice.
So I think Asthan really is just an overarching broad term to refer to the other terms that you've talked about. Dharamsala or Gurdwara, they're referring to the same thing in a way. There are other terms as well. What they actually refer to is different names in time. So we understand that Dharamsala is one of the oldest terms, that really the place of Dharam, of righteousness. And we find that term being used in reference to Guru Nanak Dev Ji's Darbar, Guru Nanak Dev Ji's Sangat, the community that Guru Nanak Dev Ji establishes, which is where our movement starts. Dharamsala is a very old word. Asthan is this is the category. So Dharamsala. Equally, linguistics change. So over time, we also find the use of the word Gurudwar or Gurdwar in Gurbani. It's become more commonplace in our parlance now to call it Gurdwara or Gurudwara, and that's come about as a probably because of the standardization. whereas before, as a community, we were probably a bit more disparate, not harmonized, existing in quite remote pockets, especially when we were still over in West Punjab, where actually most of the population was Muslim. You only had maybe less than 10% Sikh. And you find the Sikhs adopting different terminologies based on their geographics. So, for example, the Sevapanthi Mahapurush, we can talk about that lineage later, but they descend from Bhai Kanhaiya, a Gursikh, Guru Tegh Bahadur, and Guru Gobind Singh Ji, well known for his philanthropy and pacifist nature and service of all of mankind and animals and that type. They would call their places Tikana, to where you rest. So literally a rest house, because they would look after wayfarers. So if you wanted to stay and you were traveling in that area, you could also just stay there, but it was also a tikana for religious understanding. So you've got different terminologies referring to similar buildings. They may be used for different purposes. So for example, a tikana would be a place of learning. You would have a vidyala, also a place of learning. You would have dharamsala, a place of congregational worship. So there are nuances in the terms of how they're being applied. They're not generic, but they do have a great degree of overlap. But really the biggest tendency is geographical and time, what's come out of Parliament.
And also like the actual origin of the Asthan. So like some of the words that are associated with them, there's like the concept of a Ganj Asthan. So like a Shaheed Ganj, a Sis Ganj, a Rakab Ganj. They are normally sort of places where a guru or a guru Sikh was cremated, or their remains were cremated, and some physical remainder of them is there, which is something which we don't always sort of necessarily like acknowledge, how that many Asthans, Gurdwara Sis Ganj, for example, they will contain a physical remnant of the path, which is what everything is sort of like built around.
So it's not like a samad necessarily, because it's still an active.
I mean,
practicing.
Even a samad itself, like is, you know, there's a lot of research which needs to be done into like many of these words, for example, because sometimes if we don't separate, like I guess in our analysis very clearly, it's easy to like for someone to overlap a samad with Mariya or Masan, which is a different kind of thing actually. So, for example, Baba Atalrai's Asthan, which would have had some kind of like physical, you can say, structure from the time of Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji, isn't generally described as a samad, but by function, by virtue of its existence, it is a samad. You can apply that to other asthans too, and in them, it's not. If you know, if you want to like look at sort of Sikh philosophy, building a place of like memory doesn't mean that that is the focus of like worship necessarily. So it was possible for yadgars, and you can.
Yeah, I think that's quite a deep point, because obviously when we look at even how we practice our faith today, but even sort of ancestrally, there's a big sort of push against not going to Mari Masana. Those that really does refer to a graveyard, and this is a tradition that you find amongst the more Sufi inclined Muslims. So you won't find it in the Shia type. It's more that more mystic side of it, and it will usually be a place where there's a Sufi saint or some revered beard, someone in their tradition, and there's an actual grave site where the body is buried. And not too dissimilar here, we're sitting in a chapel, you would often find relics in churches, and then people almost go and touch those relics and want good fortune from them and pray to the relic and invoke the relic as a proxy for their source of worship. Whereas you might class it as a subtle distinction, but where the Sikhs erect these samad type structures, they may even invoke the people they remember. So, you know, if you go to Amritsar now, people throng the Baba Deep Singh Gurdwara, the Shaheedan Gurdwara. But it's a subtle distinction, because people go there in the memory of the person, invoke that memory, but are not necessarily praying to bones or a physical object in order to curry fortune. They're trying to remember the acts of valor and invoke the memory in their own spiritual practice. A yadgari, and yadgari again as a word, fortress of memory, really, literally. So a bastion where we preserve memory. And again, I said this in the podcast with Jawala, that I came across a book some time ago called Sri Gurdwara Darshan. It was written by Davinder Singh Gyani, who was by Thakur Singh Gyani, sorry, who was quite a learned Vidwan. He wrote a number of different poetic treatises at the end of the sort of start of the 20th century. And he found a hukamnama amongst the Sodhi, so Guru Gobind Singh Ji's ancestral family lineage, a handwritten one, and there were 10 hukms to Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, and one of them was Jaake Sarhand nu Shahidi Yadgar Banao, for the Chote Sahibzade. So the word Yadgari is used there. So if that hukamnama is to be accepted, and I accept it based off the research and the handwritten account, then we know that and we all as Sikhs give more authenticity to where we can try and ascribe something to the Gurus themselves as the ultimate source of our tradition. Then we understand that this concept of Yadgari has existed since Guru Nanak Dev Ji and from the Sikhs onwards, in terms of maintaining a physical place for memory, recollection.
The Asthan, going back to Asthan then, as a kind of how you describe it, is it always connected to a lineage? Is it always connected to a very physical person, a lineage? The Guru Granth Sahib, let's say, for example, may or may not be there, or is there?
Definitely may or may not. It's definitely so. Like as someone who's sort of generally more involved in studying and like physically preserving Gurmukhi pothis, is as a simple sort of fact, like the number of historical Guru Granth Sahibs which existed over time is grown, but it would definitely outnumber the number of Asthans. And even within like living memory, like I remember someone once telling me about how Gurdwara Baba Bakala, like for a long time, really mainly had trusted or like a pothi. So Guru Granth Sahib being there definitely that isn't the sole sort of like, you can say, indication of an Asthan. It was a rich sort of like diverse variety of, you can say, of Asthans which Sikh had and still do, which took a variety of different forms. It could be as simple as like a tree with a Nishan Sahib. And I remember Gani Sher Singh mentioning this, how like around the sort of Pahadiyan, around Anandpur Sahib, there are like many sort of like little known Asthans which even now don't have like a Gurdwara, but there is some kind of Nishan Sahib there, which is connected to the various skirmishes which took place between like Guru Gobind Singh Ji, Singhs, you can see the Khalsa, and sort of Rajput and Mughal forces.
I mean, that's a really interesting point what you raised. So who is it connected to? And I was thinking about this recently. The most obvious of Asthans are connected to the Gurus or famous Sikhs like Baba Deep Singh. They invoke the memory of that person, and I think because we identify that tradition, we find it very interesting, very passionate, and it invokes a deep sense of emotion in us. But I was thinking about how, 1947, we lose probably more than half of our heritage in that partition, and the Asthans now are the only memory that we were even there, because we've lost most of our population. So our window into the past of what happened on that side of the border is through the physical remnants, however they maintain, and they are preserving the memory of the people who were there. And to the point where now, when I look at some of the lost heritage books or anything that's documenting anything on that side, where we've lost the ability to maintain the vast majority of Asthans, even Gurdwara that don't have what I would say, early Sikh history association. I think I was talking to you just earlier. There's a Gurdwara called Bhai Karam Singh Gurdwara that was built in the 1930s. And that Gurdwara now has huge relevance because it documents that our people were there. It doesn't have a lineage back to the Gurus or anything like that. And in a way, if we bring it back to our borders now, because we are a more contemporary generation, perhaps we don't think, okay, Havelock Road Gurdwara is an Asthan in the sense that we're talking about Nandgana Sahib, right? But it will be, and it is becoming that. And if you look to say Shepherd's Bush Gurdwara, Central Sikh Khalsa Gurdwara, That has history with Maharaja Davinder Singh. It's got history with Sant Teja Singh. So wherever Sikhs go, they create that history, and then it starts to become that sort of romantic history over time that perhaps we as contemporary generations don't appreciate. But as we get further down the line, they will build that same sort of connection.
I think it's the acknowledgement that if you imagine everything just being a series of present moments, and all of the art that we are talking about, and whether it's even an Asthan or a fresco or a miniature painting or a sword, essentially what we have is a whole load of people documenting themselves in that very moment, with or without a vision of legacy. And often without, really. Like it's just happening, and it so happens, like you said, with the Gurdwara here, it just so happens that they turn into this, they have this huge importance, and we have a legacy attached to those institutions as time just passes. And I think much of what we are kind of interested in is that documentation of those people that we are suddenly trying to kind of forge some kind of connection with before it's lost. We are going to lament, when those buildings, those Asthans, like perish in West Punjab, for example. Why is the question. I think that's something that we've got to really think about. What is it that we are trying to preserve? For what reason? For what, what use is that to us? Why? Someone could ask us, why should we preserve?
I think this is a really interesting question, because we definitely talk about how things change over time, and that's incredibly visible. If you start to look into this, especially with your work, you will have seen the metamorphosis, how things change over time. I think where things have changed in our community's trajectory and history in the last 50 to 100 years is, take a seed will be in the ground, a tree can grow to 100 foot or above, it can last for hundreds, even 1,000 years, but if it loses its connection from the roots, from where the seed has come from, it will die. So it doesn't matter how high it gets or how far away from the source it gets, if it's not connected to the root, it dies. And I think that's why there's this sudden feeling, certainly in me, this is what I identify, that if we cannot see where the source came from, if we allow change to go not unchecked, but not to understand that change and to be able to map it back and say, well, yes, the tree's making this massive canopy, but if I can't follow it all the way down to its root, I can't find where it came from. I have no idea where it's rooted in time or history or in significance.
And also helps us stay balanced. I was thinking about this as general life principle, like to be like balanced like a tree. Like if one aspect becomes overdeveloped and it forgets the entirety of itself, it becomes imbalanced. And like that kind of, when you hear like different types of Sikh, talking about issues with Virasati heritage being lost, there's a feeling that there's a problem, something's not right. There's a feeling of frustration that why is it that when you want to go to different asthans in Punjab, that there's not enough there, which basically connects you with some kind of memory of the past. And it's partly because physically what you see is so similar to one another.
I think the analogy to the comparison to a tree, in terms of if we think about our material heritage, like in that way, I think the other two big factors that ensure a tree's survival is, one, its lack of rigidity, its flexibility, its kind of movement in the wind. The fact that it doesn't get broken, it doesn't get destroyed, it adapts, it changes. But I think the other thing is that beneath the surface is its connectivity to everything else around it, and this, which is really crucial to its own survival. In fact, beneath it, it's connected to other trees and other root systems, and some say actually there is only one organism. What you think is a forest is actually one tree. So I think that's really fascinating, because I think it's, it brings us back, I think, to going back to that wonderful kind of idyllic Asthan, and all of the kind of nurturing kind of nature of it. I think fundamentally, there's something that we feel needs to survive, something that we are taking very practical benefits from in our life, else why we would ditch it. But we are trying to keep something alive. The question is we also, as we look at how history changes, as cultures change, we see everything being this constant state of kind of evolving. So I suppose in many ways we are preserving something, not considering it as this single moment in time, but something that evolved to get there. But we are also evolving. So, we might have to adapt and evolve in a certain way as well now.
And language helps. So like we try to draw on, you can say, Punjabi words, Hindi, Gurmukhi sort of like vocabulary. And the word we draw on is sambal, which is just really care, which it doesn't have the same kind of like, you can say, boundaries as like a word like preservation might have. Sambal is just care. And it can take a variety of forms, and it lets us make this otherwise what some people would say is like a Western concept of conservation. It makes it this is actually indigenous. We have a you can say an approach to caring for our past, which is part of our Virasati itself, which we can't say is like derived or taught by a European or anything like that. Not to say that we won't learn anything from any other culture, but we do have a tradition of sambal, and all the sort of examples we'll be talking about, they really draw on that. I want to sort of like take us to an actual Asthan, a physical place, so Gurdwara Baba Bikrama Singh Bedi. One of the most fascinating parts of that Asthan is the fact that almost every wall in that Asthan at one point had some kind of painting. It was a highly visual Asthan, and of the original paintings, you can probably say maybe like 1/3 of the wall surface still has paintings on it. And of those, which still are paintings, about half are in a good state of preservation, and the other half have various issues going on. So Virasati Asthan Seva is fundraising for that, but we also want to educate Sangha to make them aware of what actually is there of value and importance in this Asthan. So when Resham Singh began to first look at images from the Asthan, there were a number of personalities, particular figures, which he was especially drawn to, which Resham Singh can talk about.
When we first got involved, we had to look at these paintings, and we saw a number of different individuals, and luckily enough, by the time we've started to look at it, it was quite obvious who they were, based off a lot of the work that you've been doing in terms of your cataloguing and some of the pieces you have in the collection, and also luckily enough some labels that are on, and of course the fact that we have the oral history and the records of the Bedi family who own that site and the Gurdwara, and so they were able to give us a sort of background on the site. So Baba Bikrama Singh Bedi was the son of Baba Sahib Singh Bedi, this magnanimous, very towering figure in Sikh history, and we know a lot about him because quite unusually he has 4 or 5 what they call Gurbilases, so the stories, and it's called Gurbilas because he was reverentially referred to as Guru, not in the same way as Guru Granth Sahib is referred to as Guru, but as a term of reverence by the disciples who would sit in his company and take learnings from him. And we find 4 or 5 chronicles just on his life, predominantly by Sevapanthi writers, Sobaram, by Lala Ram, but also then by slightly later writers, Pandit Sher Singh Nirmala, who was a disciple of, a later disciple of Baba Sahib Singh, Baba Bir Singh. He was his disciple, and he's written a very long piece on it. That alone gives us some clue that this is a very towering figure, because you don't just get 4 or 5 chronicles written about you if you're not somebody of huge influence. The only other sort of individuals that get that level of treatment and beyond are the 10 Sikh gurus and Ranjit Singh, probably, in terms of life chronicling. So in terms of Baba Sahib Singh, who was he? I'll just take a few minutes to elaborate that for our listeners. So Baba Sahib Singh was one of the direct lineal descendants of Guru Nanak Dev Ji, the first Sikh Guru, through his second son, the Baba Lakshmi Das. Baba Sahib Singh's position was sort of 11th generation. His grandfather was somebody called Baba Kalatari Ji, who in the Sikh history annals is quite famous, quite an eccentric character, who was a contemporary of Guru Gobind Singh Ji and had met Guru Gobind Singh Ji on a number of different occasions. Being the family and direct descendants of Guru Nanak Dev Ji meant that they always enjoyed a sort of level of prestige. And one of the things that sort of earned them that respect as well was their deference to the established spiritual lineage of Guru Nanak Dev Ji. So Baba Kalatari Ji was a very devoted spiritual disciple of Guru Gobind Singh Ji as well.
Even his name,
Kalatari, yeah.
Miracle worker.
Miracle worker. Yeah, so he was known for his spiritual prowess. His son is Baba Ajit Singh Bedi, and then Baba Ajit Singh Bedi's son is Baba Sahib Singh. And it's interesting how, I mean, I won't segue too much into it, but in Beer Mrigesh, which is one of the source texts that I use to look into these individuals, it's Beer Mrigesh, the Beer being Baba Bir Singh Narangabad, Mrigesh being the Sadhu Pasha word for Singh, lion, tiger. So it's just a synonym and a different. Mrigesh is, yeah, so referring to Singh basically. That biography, but it covers Baba Sahib Singh, Baba Bir Singh, Bhai Maharaja Singh, Baba Khuda Singh. So this whole lineage of saints, which we'll get onto in a minute.
Sorry to interrupt. It's just really interesting as you talk about Baba Sahib Singh's lineage, and we're thinking about where we are in time. Just to think about, okay, he's 11th generation from Guru Nanak, but he's only 2 generations away from Guru Gobind Singh.
Yes, exactly.
So just to think about that for a moment, where his grandfather is a contemporary of Guru Gobind Singh, so he potentially is living amongst people who've had darshan of Guru Gobind Singh.
Yeah.
And then going into the Ranjit Singh era, only 1 generation, 2 generations after that, there are still people alive at that moment that have actually been in Guru Gobind Singh's darbar and are in their final years when Ranjit Singh is emerging. So it's just fascinating to think about how close that is.
Yeah. So Baba Sahib Singh's birthday is 1756. Guru Gobind Singh Ji's ascension is 1708. So less than 50 years, 48-year period in between them. So very right. Guru Gobind Singh Ji's memory is still in living memory, because there are people who would have seen it, including the Bedi's own ancestors who would have been present. It's interesting because the bakshish or the blessing for Baba Sahib Singh comes from a game of chess that Baba Kalatari Ji is playing with Guru Gobind Singh Ji. So Guru Gobind Singh Ji was known to play chess, or a variant of it, and I won't segue too much into it, but it's a nice story. It brings these things to life. That initially, the first 2 games, Baba Kalatari Ji is losing badly, and Guru Gobind Singh Ji sort of doing McCall, taking the mick out of Baba Kalatari Ji, saying, "What's wrong? You seem to be losing. Are you not putting your full effort into this?" And Baba Kalatari Ji's "Nahi ji Benti, I'm sort of, I'm in doing this in deference. You are my spiritual preceptor." And then Baba Kalatari Ji then says, "Okay," he sort of, and we always think about how would we be if the physical guru in human form, how would they be in front of us? How would we react? Baba Kalatari Ji then sort of takes on this, okay, now I'll show you, I can beat you now. But the text says, under, he's still doing a task, Maharaj, please let me win, let me in. So on the outside, he's projecting this competitiveness, and on the inside he's sort of still doing this supplication to his spiritual preceptor that please have mercy on me, let me win so that I can keep my dignity in this matter. And the sort of fruition of the chess game is that then Guru Gobind Singh Ji, and this comes a lot in the history, that where the Guru is happy with someone, they will give them a blessing and say ask for something, and then sort of Baba Kalatari Ji then says, let the lineage continue type thing of the Bedis, and this blessing then for Baba Sahib Singh comes that your son Ajit Singh will have.
Where does that Sakhi come from?
Well, so it was recorded by Pandit Sher Singh. Pandit Sher Singh was contemporary to Baba Bir Singh, so he would have recorded it from Baba Bir Singh's understanding of what had happened at that time. Baba Bir Singh then obviously getting it from Baba Sahib Singh. So it's oral histories transmitting into written histories. Oral histories obviously being earlier, but then finding place in the written text. So that's where Baba Sahib Singh comes into the picture. But the interesting thing is, when you start to trace the Bedi lineage, it's really Baba Sahib Singh that brings them back into the fore of the Sikh community and having a real position of influence, authority, both in spiritual and political matters. And his life is very interesting. Baba Sahib Singh, his father dies early on. Baba Sahib Singh is only about 16 years old when Baba Ajit Singh is around sort of the Kolkata area and passes away whilst he's doing yatra. So it's interesting because Ranjit Singh's father passes when he's in an early age, 10, 11, and this is something. And even Baba Bir Singh, his father passes when he's about 16. So this is commonplace for young boys to lose their fathers at quite an early age.
And also, their fathers are very young
Yes.
when they die. So actually, when we look back at it, so when Ranjit Singh's father dies, he's only about 26, 27 years old. So actually what we find out from that is that there's only about 15 years that are separating one generation from the next. So it's, we often think about these men as being old men when they die. Maharaja Singh's only in his 20s when he dies.
Yeah.
So it's interesting when we think about that.
Yeah, so true, because like now, most of us are used to having maybe 20, 30 year gap between generations, and 15 seems like, wow, they're almost in the same generation, but it's a move historically. Anyway, so Baba Sahib Singh's route to sort of building this prowess as a person is rooted in the fact that after his father passes away, Babaji goes into a period of intense meditation for about 12 years, really just focusing on the spiritual side. Babaji had already had quite a authentic and deep education in Gurmat, Sikh ethics, related traditions like Vedanta and Ayurveda, which was quite typical of the time for maybe what you would say families of nobility, or that, if you can use that term. And this now was his expression into that side. And we find that people are starting to understand that Baba Sahib Singh has something apart from just the credentials. And I say just, but not just is he a lineal descendant, because we know that other descendants weren't viewed so favorably, even if they were from other lineages of the Guru, maybe the Pala clan or the Sodhi clan from different Gurus. Not everyone was afforded that respect automatically. They sort of got a base level, but Baba Sahib Singh took it to another level, and you find him being seen and viewed as a source of spiritual authority. So we find other saints coming to Baba Sahib Singh for education, understanding, for solving problems, or just for what we call darshan, to be in the company of someone who's considered holy. And actually this tradition of starting a very wide-scale langar, which we'll see when we talk about Baba Bir Singh being a very key thing about that these figures are known for. Baba Sahib Singh starts in Una, where he settles around Himachal Pradesh.
There's a nice little detail to that. Or like when I had the chance to go to Una for the first time, it was in November last year. There's a sort of like a stone pit basically there, close to the Asthan of Baba Bikrama, which they already say this is where they used to like gun atta for the langar, and it's a huge pit, like a few meters like square, and it was nice to see that, because when you see images of like large langar, it makes you think, oh, how are they preparing the atta for it? And then I could physically see it right there. That was the sort of place they were doing it. They had other little sort of stories attached to it, where they say on some occasions when there was so much sangat, when they would like cook the prasad, they would only cook one side basically, because they had to like take them off so quickly to feed sort of like sangat and people coming along, that they would only ever really cook one side. This may find itself in some Saki somewhere, but it was a little oral history told by Baba Sahib Singh Bedi at that Asthan.
Is he the eldest?
Baba Sahib Singh?
Yeah, this is Baba Sahib Singh.
Oh, Baba Sahib Singh. Yes, he's the eldest. There's two brothers. One is Baba Sahib Mahbub Singh is the younger brother.
Okay, so he's the eldest. Okay,
yeah,
interesting.
That's right. So Baba Sahib Singh is this very interesting figure. I mean, I remember looking through your book Empire of the Sikhs, based off one of the exhibitions that you did, and you have a wonderful painting of Baba Sahib Singh in your collection. And in your write-up next to that painting in the book, you talk about how you really felt that you needed to have something that connects to this individual as necessary to tell the story of the Sikh Empire. And I'm just wondering, why did you feel that way about Baba Sahib Singh? What was it that made you think that way?
Yeah, I think as we mentioned a moment ago, first of all, I think there'll be many listeners who've never heard of Baba Sahib Singh, and yet you've articulated that he's hugely important and hugely influential. He's a hugely influential figure in Sikh history, and so it's about telling untold stories. And I think much of my collecting practice it's about storytelling, and sometimes you don't necessarily know the story that you're going to tell, but you're fitting these pieces in. We mentioned a moment ago how he kind of bridges that gap between what we know quite commonly, more so about Ranjit Singh's era, but the end of the Guru period. So he's something that kind of links those two. He also kind of crosses those boundaries between, is he a holy man? Is he a local nobleman? Is he a warrior? What is he? Is he a scholar? What is he? So he seems to, in very much a similar way to how one might kind of imagine Guru Gobind Singh, he's almost a bit of a polymath. Like he almost, it's all of it, and not just one thing. And I find that fascinating, as just thinking about him as this hugely powerful figure who doesn't just have some clout because he's a descendant of Guru Nanak, but who is he? And we also know that he, during the Misl period, the late Misl period, he's given a lot of respect, isn't he? And he is the one that, when you look him up, the first thing that you often read is that he's the one that anoints, Maharaja Ranjit Singh proclaims him, Maharaja in 1801. So who is he to have been able to have done that? So coming across that picture, you never know what you're going to find, but it was kind of like just naturally kind of imperative that it needed to be acquired to kind of fill a gap in that storytelling. And there's so much you can look at and discuss from there. Him as a and I think that's the beauty of any exhibition, but any work of art. You can actually build exhibitions around single works of art when you think about all the different themes that come off certain objects, and that as a picture, we can look at the kind of the lineage of the gurus. You can look at Baba Sahib Singh being, like we just said, an eldest, but is it a patriarchal society that we're in? What's the structure of nobility? How and why does he have that influence? How does it move from that period into kind of modern Sikh history? How does our faith and religious structures, how they get impacted and changed by that? So there's so much you can discuss of him, and he's a relatively unknown figure. And also I think it makes your work even more valuable and interesting. Actually, when you look at it, we have very few images of him, really. So we are literally holding on to kind of threads and trying to connect back. Otherwise, someone like him could easily have been lost. Also in that picture, as you remember, luckily for us, it's inscribed. That provides information in itself.
Tell us more about that inscription. It mentions an artist's name as well, and the year of painting, I believe.
Yeah, so I think it's is that the one that mentions
I think that's Baba Bir Singh.
That's Baba Bir Singh. Bhagat Singh. Bhagat Singh is the Baba Bir Singh painting. Very similar styles.
Yeah.
What's interesting about the Baba Sahib Singh painting, first of all, is that, as you said, Resham, that he's described as Guru. So it says, I think it says Baba Guru or Guru Baba, Guru Baba Sahib Singh. So that's the first kind of interesting revelation, is why is he described, for many of us who think about, 10 physical gurus, Guru Granth Sahib, why is he being described as Guru? We're going to probably talk about another picture maybe later on we'll touch upon, which also has the word Guru on it. So that's interesting. And the other interesting aspects I find from an artistic perspective, it actually gives us the school of painting. So for us to be able to understand where these pictures are being produced, who possible patrons might be, who the artists are, although it doesn't have an artist name, it does say that it's from the Gangra school of art. So it does say that it's come from the Punjab hills, comes from Gangra, the hills. It's that school of art that is giving us this picture. We know that the main schools of art, Gangra, Guler, these are where the artists that have left the Mughal court, have gone to, have set up their schools, and then Misaldars and Sikh patrons, not just Ranjit Singh, but other patrons before Ranjit Singh. These are the artists that they're going to. So that's how we have that continuing kind of tradition. So that I find quite fascinating. Also, I think there's reference to either Garama or Barama. We often find these numbers, so we know that he's 11th descendant, or he's considered an 11th guru. Either is that, or he's 12th or 11th generation. So we find that quite common on those few pictures of Baba Sahib Singh that survive.
Yeah, there's some things I want to say about that sort of painting myself, which I find particularly interesting, is that it has a fair amount of architecture in it. I was just reading this morning this book about the techniques of Pahari painting, which looks at the different schools and so forth, and it talks about how different sort of typical features are presented. Because these ideas of these schools, these families, Guler, Kangra, Basoli, various other smaller ones as well, they're sort of identified by particular art historical features, the way trees are shown, the way eyes are done, the way hair is done. And the way architecture is done is also one of those features. And in this book, the author was commenting about how in Guler paintings, the architecture shown is typically shown to be like quite plain in colour, whereas in Basoli's associate paintings, it's quite colourful. And it's nice in this particular painting of Baba Sahib Singh Bedi, it shows them seated inside a physical building. And this sort of research hasn't been done yet, but it's we have the images, and we have Baba Sahib Singh Ji, who are in Urna Sahib, to help with this as well. But it's possible some features of the painting can be connected, possibly, to the actual Asthans there, because Urna Sahib is actually, fortunately, one of the few very well preserved Asthans, you can say, in Sikh history. It has the Yadgar Asthan of Baba Kalatari Ji. It has the Damdama Sahib, Baba Sahib Singh Bedi, which also contains their Samadh. It's quite possible that some of these features are actually can be connected between paintings and back to the Asthan. It's something which, drawing these sorts of connections between like different types of Virasat, I find is a very enjoyable thing, because it makes you then realize, okay, sometimes artists were, just making just nice landscapes and background features, but sometimes if you look at them carefully enough, they relate to something which is physically tangible.
There's always all sorts of kind of clues and cues into some kind of the life that these people that are being depicted are living, and even in the exhibition, in the space in which this picture is, on the opposite wall, what you have is from the school of Nansuk, we have those early portraits of the gurus, of three of the gurus, and you'll see the similarity. And with some of this particular style of picture is that it's almost, this is a vista, like it is a physical window that we are looking through.
They have the curtain that's rolled up.
Yeah, the drapery, you have the kind of the screen, the blind which is rolled up. You are having a peek into the life. You've got the columns, you've got the pillars, you might have a balustrade. It really is. It's like, well, let's have a look through the window and see what they're doing. And I find that, and then beyond that, then you've crossed that threshold, and now you're seeing the life. You might have landscape, cultivation. You might have the hint of devotees in the background, like, for example, with the Guru Arjan portrait. You have certain, after a while, here, as I mentioned, we're fortunate because we have this inscription. Every now and then, you need one inscription to turn up, a bit like a Rosetta Stone kind of thing, to just link lots and lots of other things, fall into place and make sense. And so from that now we can infer, okay, let me analyze this style and understand what Gangra school is. You mentioned another portrait a moment ago suddenly we'll have the style of Harbhagat Singh, the palette of Harbhagat Singh. We might be able to take that somewhere else. But also we're getting an idea, there's certain iconography, in the absence of an inscription, there will be certain iconography in place that will allow us to detect Baba Sahib Singh again. Because he might have a similar posture. He might be wearing, similar dress. He might be holding his hand in a similar way. Ranjit Singh often, for example, you'll see him with a handkerchief in his left hand he uses to wipe his eye. So you see that, so you're pulling together all these clues.
Yeah, it's a particularly nice one. I mean, it's got, you're looking into a window and then there's what is possibly like an open door which goes to landscape beyond, where there is at least looks like one Sikh with a ghoda, a horse, which it's a small thing, but if you can read into that this is trying to say that like around Baba Sahib Singh there were people on horseback. They had this sort of around them.
Just a quick little side thing, just out of, you might find it interesting. So a friend of mine in Canada, Sukhbir Singh, he's constantly he looks out for certain things, and I'd previously bought a set of prints and slides, glass plate negative slides from the late 19th, early 20th century, Amritsar-based photographer, who amazingly, in the early 20th century, was photographing frescoes and paintings and making prints of them that he was selling outside Darbar Sahib. Right. Now, I managed to get a number of the actual glass plate negatives and some of the original prints. And my friend, he found a early 20th century print, black and white print, in quite not great condition, of that very painting. So that very painting which surfaced was also deemed then valuable enough for someone in the kind of pretty much the dawn of photography to photograph it and sell prints of it to Sangat. So we know also how these, maybe it was produced to be bound into a manuscript, maybe it was being kept loose. But we also know that somebody is seeing some value in somebody else also having access to that imagery.
The access point is very interesting because people to look at generally, you can say North Indian miniature painting, people are now more looking into how these things were actually sort of looked at and appreciated in the original context. Like B.N. Goswami did a lot of work in that sort of kind of field. Things which are now, as times are now, are mostly seen in exhibitions with a sort of like window mount and a glass frame. Historically, was more common for in a small society for these paintings to be wrapped in some cloth and handed around to be looked at occasionally, right? But what interests me about the access point is that physical Asthans provided access to images for, you can say, much more wider, diverse mixture of people. Yet some of these images which are on paper for small audiences somehow also find their way in Asthans. And the Gurdwara Baba Bikrama Singh Bedi is a good example because it contains paintings which are, you can say, drawn on models or archetypes or sort of typical types which are found in this particular painting.
Yeah, it's very interesting because when we part of the reason why we contacted you is first because we saw this comparison of the fresco of Baba Sahib Singh and your painting, and the similarities are quite striking. And even to our untrained eyes, you can see that this is pretty much the same person. And when we start to look at the two pictures, you can start to draw out how they were influenced. We know that Baba Bikrama Singh's Asthan was built in the 1870s, and I believe your painting is dated earlier than that, probably towards the 1840s.
I think it's dated to 1839, I think.
Yeah. So we know that with quite a lot of certainty that the paintings then done at the Asthan are after your painting.
Yeah.
And so it's possible, it could well be possible that the painting is informing the paintings at the Asthan.
Yeah, and artists had these sort of practices, there were various ways that they would replicate images. Using a piece of what they call jarbi or jarba, which is it's a sort of an animal skin, or it comes from various animal parts. But it's used as sort of a tracing paper Sometimes you also get like sort of paper pinprick templates as well being used. Yeah, pouncing they call it, where like you make little sort of like needle points and put a sort of coloured powder and push it through. Those sorts of mechanisms would have enabled, you can say, paintings to be like reproduced. So what scaled out, yeah.
And also, so the other one of the famous Sikh artists, Bishan Singh, the Darbar painting of Ranjit Singh, the Darbar Sahib painting of Ranjit in the exhibition there. These artists who are producing works on paper are also the artists that are doing the frescoes.
Yeah.
So we know that they are doing both at the same time anyway. But what you have typically is that you might have an initial work which is being produced by an artist. We might find other versions of that work because now they're being produced by his students. Like any kind of artist kind of atelier, you have an artist, maybe you have someone doing the gilding, someone doing the silver work, someone doing the pouncing at the beginning, whatever it might be. But then suddenly you have this body of reference work, which clearly feeds into the frescoes, which are then being produced 30 or 40 years later. So we might even find, not only are they having, they're being influenced and seeing these, interpreting these, but it may even be the same school of artists or even the family of artists, future generations of.
Yeah, because it's an important thing to remember what we call as like sometimes schools of art. It's like school is like it's a word that's used like for art historical kind of convenience, you can say, but it didn't necessarily mean that there were sort of like very sort of like strictly defined spaces.
It's not in the Western sense that this is an institution where you go and learn. You just have a maybe master, disciple, apprentice.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
exactly. These are some. I mean, people who understand this idea of like sampradayas. These artists were working in that kind of like context. There were ustads who were teaching their like shagids.
Yeah, so traditional knowledge sharing is what we're really talking about. Yeah, traditional methods of teaching any form of what we call vidya, knowledge, being taught in that similar way.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And when we look at this painting, so you obviously have a lot of experience with looking at paintings and using your art history knowledge to tease out certain details. Is there anything striking when you look at these depictions of Baba Sahib Singh that speak to you about or tell us something about the individual that the artist may be trying to convey?
Well, firstly, when we look at images of Baba Sahib Singh, one of the ways in which we recognize him, I think three probably characteristic kind of features. Firstly, we're seeing him in the later years of his life. So when we're seeing him, he has a white beard. Secondly, he has a very unique way of tying his dastar, which is almost wrapped around his face. Sometimes is extended on. So either he has a shawl which is of the same color as the dastar, which is then tied into a dastar and then he's wrapped round. But he has that very unique feature. I remember seeing some of my uncles dressing that way in the bin sometimes. We see that, so that's already quite distinctive. And finally, we know that the mustard yellow that he's often wearing is one of the first kind of telltale signs that this could be Baba Sahib Singh.
If I connect to those things, so like the star style, you mentioned unique, but actually it's interesting, like there are other figures who have got similar dastars. If you compare to Maharaja Ranjit Singh's dastar, essentially like a dastar which has some kind of like cloth at the back as well, which it seems like there was a point in time when that was like a regularly tied dastar style, which like, pardon me for me sort of like not fully understanding it, but there are, when you look at sort of like 20th century paintings showing what people thought 18th century Sikh were like, even in like sort of some Punjabi films and things, they often show like Sikhs of the Misl period having some kind of
so he has that, but what kind of differentiates what we see depictions of him is he has that, but actually what he has is a continuation between the dastar and cloak that he's wearing. So what we're seeing there is somehow this is kind of tied and then wrapped around him, whether he's on horseback or elephant or.
So it's like what they call like the shadla is perhaps put on first, and the star is put over the top to secure it or something like that.
It seems that way.
These are interesting things, and I find them important to understand because, like, the sort of like paintings which I'm talking about, 20th century ones showing like, Sikh and of the Raj or something like that, because by that point these sorts of the star styles had gone out of currency. The way they're shown is probably not like anatomically and like physiologically correct, and unless people actually try to understand, okay, how could physically a star like this be tied, then we can understand, that's how they did it. It's an important thing. I mean, history, the star hasn't really been fully written by anyone yet, but the type of cloth, width of cloth, I remember, I mean, once I think it was at this particular shop, I was seeing like a historical dastar of Rajasthani origin, and I was interested in how wide the fabric was, because obviously like fabrics made on hand looms have a sort of set width, and it shapes the way the stitching is done. Even garments, the way they're made, historical cachere compared to like modern ones. Whereas modern sort of like fabric can be made on a machine loom, which is extremely wide. It changes the way it's stitched and changes the physical thing that's produced. The physical of the star, then, how they were tying it, it would have been dictated by whatever cloth was available and the way it could have been made. So.
But it's also very clear, even from that image, because he's sitting opposite his son, Teg Singh, Baba Teg Singh, who also has a very unique the star, which also helps us to identify him. And so what we also can get from this image is that we at least have two variations. And actually we have multiple variations, and why wouldn't we? And I think, is function, is it form, is it the aesthetics of it? But what's interesting is that the artist is picking up very individual details, and these aren't as much as sometimes, particularly when we're looking at this Bahari art, Indian art, Punjabi art through a Western lens, as we're trained to do, sometimes it can be dismissed. It can be dismissed as being, not accurate. I remember once doing an exhibition, and someone came into the exhibition and immediately came to me and said, does this exhibition have a true likeness of Guru Gobind Singh in it? Like from the time? And I said, sorry, it doesn't. He said, okay, and then he left. And now, we are obsessed by seeing true likeness, but we might make the mistake of dismissing these artists as not giving us individual features, but they do. So I find that quite fascinating, because we can find these characters elsewhere.
So, I had the great privilege of bumping into you yesterday at the exhibition, and we were talking a little bit about this yellow colour. And we, through our discussions leading up to this one, we have looked at probably 3 variations of Baba Sahib Singh's painting, all showing them in yellow. And as of yet, couldn't come to a definitive conclusion as to why. But just through my perusal of the Umdat, which is Ranjit Singh's chronicle diary done by Solnath Suri, so his daily court diary, we find repeated mention of when the Maharaja is happy, him ordering the regiments to wear yellow colour. Or when he's meeting, there's a particular incident in there as well, he's meeting Bhai Vasti Ram, who's a very famous Sevapanthi, who's also a disciple of Baba Sahib Singh, very famed for his medicines. Perhaps that's a connection with Ranjit Singh. It's not one I've explored, but he's very famous for the herbal remedies he would work up and give for free to the destitute and poor who needed it in Lahore area. And there's a particular incident where Ranjit Singh is hoping that Bhai Vasti Ram will present him with a yellow robe. So there seems to be, at least from the diary, some importance attached to that colour, be it some sort of auspiciousness. And we know it's also associated with certain times of the year. So when the festival of Basant Panchami is celebrated, everybody wears yellow, and there's portraiture of Ranjit Singh sitting in an all yellow attire, and everybody's dressed in yellow. So just speculating, but maybe there's some avenue there.
There is importance. Even within that one Asthan, the Gurda Baba Bikrama Singh, there are other paintings less well preserved. There's one which, after a conversation I was looking at, which is a portrait which is clearly of Guru Gobind Singh Ji, where their bastar, their clothes are shown in the same sort of colour, basically, and quite a similar sort of posture as well. So
and that yellow colour is something that I remember I translated a document that is read out at Hazur Sahib a couple of years ago called the Saki Karan Ki, which is a eyewitness account of what happened at Nandir when Guruji left their body, and in terms of sort of erecting a tent and sitting on a funeral pyre and then disappearing with the horse. But very specifically in that document, it mentions Guru Gobind Singh Ji wearing yellow attire. And some of the portraiture that we have, and we can put this in the video, there is a portrait of Guru Gobind Singh Ji astride a horse riding towards a funeral pyre in yellow clothing that echoes that historical account. There's a lot of, when you look at the historical text, there's a lot of connection made between Baba Sahib Singh and Guru Gobind Singh in the population's mind. People sort of perceive that Guru Gobind Singh Ji's message, the sort of manifestation of what we call miri piri, so spiritual and temporal power that Guru Gobind Singh Ji displayed in terms of martial prowess, securing power for the sake of righteousness to prevail, those same Sikh ideas being echoed by Baba Sahib Singh. And what I find quite interesting is when I look at all this imagery, and it's something that you talk about in terms of earlier portraiture, when we even look at Guru Arjan Dev Ji, is this combination of different objects that are presented with Baba Sahib Singh to bring out that narrative. So if we look at the portrait that in your collection, in one hand Babaji has a mala, a rosary, the sign of a saint, someone who's done intensive meditation on Naam, has Naam Kamai, is at the forefront of Naam Kamai spiritual worship. And then in front of him is a well-studied talwar. Do you have any further thoughts on any other aspects of the portraiture that might bring out that sort of?
Yeah, I think naturally. I mean, once you see weaponry, we mentioned horses. You're also seeing the fact that he has this halo, this he's nimbate, and that is a feature that isn't just reserved for holy men, holy individuals in imagery. Like we see it also on kings, and it's not always there, but sometimes there. But that in itself is quite interesting that he's shown in that way. So I think we can see evidently, particularly with the rosary, that he is both spiritual, but also with the fact that, as you say, he has this hold on sort of temporal power, which is one of the reasons that I find him very interesting as a figure. It's also important to mention here that, by this time, Europeans have been in India for the best part of 100 to 150 years already, and Baba Sahib Singh, he goes to war against Europeans. He goes to war against individuals like George Foster. The forces of these mercenaries who are coming to seek their fortune. So he's fully kind of witnessing the clash of cultures. I'm just going to reminded me of the yellow. We mustn't forget also actually whether it's the dye in the kapra or even the pigments. It might be worthwhile just looking into where that yellow dye actually comes from.
Yes, the yellow dye from there is significance. I mean, there's a lot of research done into yellow color in Bahari painting. There's this sort of like Indian yellow color, which it's one of the sort of hallmarks which makes, you can say, Bahari painting generally recognizable, is that they place a lot of value on this yellow. And it's interesting, Bahari painting doesn't use generally like a lot of metallic pigments. It doesn't use a lot of gold or silver. Where it does is very limited. And some people comment that it's because, the courts which they were in, they were not so like wealthy as like, you could say the Mughal darbars where artists were coming from previously. It's one theory, but also like yellow, what we call yellow also like in mythology and history, it basically is connected to gold as well.
So it has inherent value.
It's gold and textile.
So I find it interesting. I mean, when I went to your exhibition yesterday, and just based off the fact that we're in this Asthan, the Bedi Asthan, and we're looking at it, we're trying to research it, and I've had to look into a lot more history that I hadn't been familiar with a few months ago, and I was just reflecting what I'd been learning and how you've set up that exhibition. It's really striking because on one side, as I was looking, so on the left-hand side in the first room, the prelude to power, you've got all the sort of depiction of the Sikh ethos, so starting with the Guru's pictures, naturally so. And then on the right-hand side, you have the meeting between Jai Singh Kanhaiya and Sansar Chand. And right next to it, you've positioned Baba Sahib Singh's portrait. And I was just saying to Jasdip this morning, I found that really poetic, because one of the things about Baba Sahib Singh, and I will quickly share this anecdote because it's really lovely, that in the Bir Mrigesh, it talks about Baba Sahib Singh actually playing an active role to save Ranjit Singh in his childhood. So Maha Singh, his father, passes away from dysentery in the middle of a military campaign. And as you were saying earlier, Maha Singh was young. I find it interesting, I can't remember the name, I think it was either Harding or someone. The English were saying that Maha Singh was so captivating as a personality that had he lived longer, he would have been the unifying monarch of Punjab. And I find it interesting, well, he didn't manage to achieve it because his life was ended where it did, but his son did. But you kind of think, well, how? And so in these chronicles of history, in the Bir Mrigesh, we find this Sakhi where Maha Singh has passed away and Baba Sahib Singh is on a tour of Nankana Sahib, that area, over the west side of Punjab. And Baba Sahib Singh goes to do what we would now call a source. In the text it's called Mukan, but to basically go and give condolences and sort of share the grief with the family. And Baba Sahib Singh is treated very well by Ranjit Singh's mother, and put up in lovely tents and really well attended to. Equally at that time, all the other Sardars, the Pangi Sardars, everybody else also comes. Politics of power. So we know that these people are actually warring with each other, and that the Sukracharya missile is at odds with the Pangi missile and the Kanhaiya missile. And yet they still come to play the condolences, and something then strikingly plays out. These Sardars come together, the Pangi Sardars come together, and I just thought I'd shared with you the writing from that text because it's really visually descriptive. So they come and give their condolences, and then Sab Sardaron Salam Milke Kari Jo Eho Kana Deo Baddo Prabal Tejaswi Malum Hota Hai. So the language is wonderful. So they're saying Sare Sardar Salah Karde Si. So all the Sardars, all the leaders, all the political Sikhs who've got power, Pangi Sardars, come together and they start talking. And they say to each other, Eo Kana Deo Bade Prabal. This Kana, the one-eyed. So we know that Ranjit Singh is known as Kana because he's lost his eye to smallpox. So this one-eyed child, Bade Prabal Tejasvi, he's becoming very powerful. So even at the age of 11, 12, in these Sardars' eyes, Ranjit Singh is powerful, is seen as strong. And we know that Maha Singh had renamed Ranjit Singh from Budh Singh after his victory. We know that he'd already been in military campaign, or at least involved or given charge when Maha Singh was taken ill. And they sort of say, Ye hum sabko dukh devoge, sabke raj saaj sheen levoge. So they say, he's looking strong now, he looks like he's quite a powerful guy, he's going to steal our raj from us in the future. He'll take it all from us. And they say, Abhi isko pi mukaye ke, iski kaan pi de chalo, kahe te jamte hue vikke boote ki jad ukhar dariye, tab to sukhen ki ukhar jata hai. And they say that like when a weed starts to sprout, it's easier to uproot it when it started to sprout rather than to let it set in and establish itself. So they're almost saying we should weed this guy out now. And they make a plan to kill Ranjit Singh. And some well-wisher, the text tells us, some well-wisher informs Ranjit Singh and his mum that these guys are after you. And they run into the sanctuary of Baba Sahib Singh, say, son, give us protection, give us protection. And the Sardars come and Baba Sahib Singh confronts them head on and says, okay, you will, bring misfortune upon your own houses if you kill this child. And he actively counsels them, and they say, you're the Bedi Golda Vans, you're the Bedi lineage, you're Guru Nanak Dev Ji's representative in their family. We'll listen to anything you say, but on this matter, we're not going to listen to you. We're going to kill him. And I think I was telling you yesterday, Davinder, there's this wonderful phrase that Baba Sahib Singh says in response. He says, Singh much puchang man sure sarna Paya Kirpan ke kar Lachmi chare den moya. So Baba Sahib Singh gives 4 examples, and he says, the whiskers of a tiger, the hood of a cobra, the protection of a warrior, and a miser's money. And the end text tells you, char den moya. You only achieve these things if you killed something. So to get the tiger's whiskers, you have to kill it. You're not going to be able to touch the tiger's whiskers if it's alive, right? To get near a cobra, unless you're a cobra handler, to get its hood, you have to kill it. to get a miser's money, he's never going to give you if he's alive, you have to kill him to get it. It's equally, someone who's in the sharan of a warrior, if you want to get what's in his protection, in this case, Ranjit Singh, you need to kill the warrior. So Baba Sahib Singh is now saying, Karke dikha. If you want to kill him, you've got to kill me. So Baba Sahib Singh is at least according to this account, is standing in the way. And the Rajas, the Sardars will back off kind of after this. And what happens, and there's a really wonderful visual thing. So he says, the Baba Sahib Singh pulls Ranjit Singh out from underneath his manja by his jura and takes his own talwar out of his gatra and puts it over Ranjit Singh and says, "Main thanu Raje da sirtaj banaunga." That I'm going to make you like the jewel in the crown of kings, essentially. And this is sort of the blessing that is seen that already at this age, at the age of 10, 11, that Baba Sahib Singh is saying that this person is going to become Maharaja, which we see happen in 1801. And whether this text is a very rich source in terms of the history of Baba Sahib Singh, Baba Bir Singh, and that lineage. But whether you put credence in it or not, we know that Ranjit Singh was invested with his royalty and his crowning, as you mentioned, his coronation, by Baba Sahib Singh Bedi. And there is a reason for that, because Baba Sahib Singh Bedi's authority as a person meant that in the Sikh faith, especially, that the Sardars couldn't very easily go against what he was saying or what he was doing, or challenge him so openly. And in a way, when I saw those two paintings together, the Kanhaiya painting, where you see, and you very visually described that painting, that Jai Singh Kanhaiya betrays Sansar Chand, there's all this squabbling, and Sansar Chand then gets together with the Sukracharyas to try and win back a fort. All this squabbling, in a way, gets dampened by the person in the next portrait, who then sort of comes in and says,
absolutely. That's so interesting. I think, in part of that storytelling of Ranjit Singh's origin story, there were no two better pictures to very quickly, once again, it speaks to how one picture you can say so much from it. And that's, such an amazing, vivid account that you've shared. And that's looking at the period just after Mahar Singh's death. So, Ranjit Singh's about 10 or so. What's interesting to note is that already by this point, so firstly, the Bangli Sardars, they are the ones that are in charge of Lahore, right? So they are in charge of Lahore, and so Ranjit Singh is consolidating other kind of confederacies and getting tactically, he's moving about and taking power. But by this time already, we know that Ranjit Singh's marriage of alliance took place about 5 years before this. So for Mahar Singh, so the first painting, which looks at this interaction between Sansar Chand and Jai Singh Kanhaiya, we're now confronting ideas around all these Sikhs warring each other. We know that, Mahar Singh and Jasdip Singh Ramgarhia are, arch enemies, Jai Singh Kanhaiya. We know that Guru Baksh Singh dies, and Ranjit Singh's father, who must be about 20 years old at that time when this happens, that is the birth of Ranjit Singh marrying into Sukrachakya missile is a smaller one. He goes into the Kanhaiya missile, marries into it. So Sahib Singh also, he's witnessing this. So this would have been going on for the last 5 years. So in the background here also is that there's already moves that are being made. So when the Bangli Sardars are talking about this young kid being powerful, is not just the fact that he's a precocious little guy who's got some character and spirit. He's already going into battle at this stage with his dad at the age of 10. But they also know all the things that are moving and shaping around this. So I think what is said, they know. So Sadakor is there in the wings. Ranjit Singh is now moving in a circle that they are obviously very unhappy about. Perhaps all of those alliances, the Ramgarhyas, the Kanhaiyas, the Sukrachakyas, are all on one side now, and the Banglis are kind of watching this. And Sahib Singh also, he's this great mediator. He's the one that they say, when the Singhs called, Sarbat Khalsa, that he is the one that gets them to put all their arms down. So it's really fascinating to think about where is he positioned? Where is Sahib Singh positioned at this point? They all revere him. And it's that thing, isn't it? They all revere him on that spiritual level and that spiritual plane. But there's a very physical, real power struggle happening here. These Sevadars from that painting, these Sikhs are killing Sikhs. This is not long after Guru Gobind Singh's passed away. And they're butchering each other. And he seems to be the only guy that has any say or control. So it's interesting to think about, where is he? Why does he pick Ranjit Singh? Is it just the fact that he's seeing something in him? Or is it that coupled with the fact that there's lots that's moving and shaping, at that time? So, but that's, it's brilliant. It's amazing to think that he had that much power. And almost when you read about Sahib Singh and you look at those pictures, he almost seems fully equipped to be Maharaja himself.
Exactly. This is the point I was about to make. Yeah. So all the depictions show Baba Sahib Singh with, like we said, both aspects. What we call, and one of the sort of epithets that's given is Raja Jogi. And this is a term that comes from Gurbani, the Pattan de Savaiye, Raj Jog Jinmarnyo comes in Savaiye Mahalle, in regard to Guru Nanak Dev Ji. And then all the subsequent Gurus in those Savaiye, the first 5 Gurus that are praised in those Savaiye. And Raj Jog really does mean one who lives a temporal life, master of a temporal life, meaning spiritually mastered, but not in this ascetic sense, that in the traditional Sanatan way of where traditional Sanatani practitioners would leave their families and go into a forest and practice sannyas in that way. That was not really the method that was prescribed amongst the Gurmat ethos, where we're talking about Raj Jog, detachment, spiritual prowess, whilst remaining temporal. And the sword and the rosary are the manifestations of that. But even that other painting from Auckland that shows Baba Sahib Singh on an elephant. Now, really, the elephant again is seen as generally a regal animal. Only really a Raja would sit on an elephant, and you see that across the subcontinent. And like you say, Baba Sahib Singh has an army. We know from other history that Baba Sahib Singh actually instigates an attack on the Malayer Kotale, the rulers there who are Muslims, because, without going into too much detail, the rationale that's given in the historical text is that the current Nawab of Malayer Kotla is now sort of brutalizing Hindu and Sikhs and is levying tax. There's a lot of forced conversion going on, and there's this whole other narrative that one of Guru Gobind Singh Ji's family members at the time of the Chote Sahibzade was interned then, and actually Guru Gobind Singh Ji's sister-in-law was interned there and murdered. And Baba Sahib Singh then sets out a rallying call to launch an attack, which fails initially because the Europeans are getting involved, but then is eventually successful. So Baba Sahib Singh isn't, in some ways, it's interesting as you say, as a character, because you have saints who are purely pacifists, the Seva Panthi. So Bhai Vasti Ram isn't engaged in temporal, and he finds a lot of favourable mention in Sohan Lal Suri's work as, he's this what you might call a classical when we consider saints outside of the Sikh tradition, they're not necessarily considered martial. In the Sikh tradition, many saints are spiritual and martial, which for most world cultures is quite a paradox. Not so for us, obviously. But Bhai Vasti Ram's more that traditional, maybe more globally recognized saint, pacifist, making medicines, healing the sick, spoken softly. As I've said, he was a disciple of Baba Sahib Singh, but Baba Sahib Singh is not only all of those things, a huge, knowledge base on Gurmat, does Katha regularly, propounds the Langar, but then instigates martial action where he sees it necessary and supports Ranjit's action against the Afghans as well when Shah Zaman turns up. Yeah, that's right. And that's really the pivotal moment, really, for Ranjit Singh that then eventually leads to his... to his establishment of power, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, that in 1796, when Shah Zaman arrives just outside of Lahore, and I write this in the catalogue, just looking at almost like when is that first pivotal moment that Ranjit Singh's reputation is forged? You know, what separates him from the other Sardars? And these 30,000 Afghans arrived just outside of Lahore, and many of these other Sardars flee. Many, and you know, and much like that Sansara Chand painting with Jai Singh, many of these Sardars also making their deals with the invading Afghans, so that they can just step out of the way. And Ranjit Singh gets 5,000 men, and he pushes Shah Zaman back, and he's just 16 years old when that first happens. And within 3 years, we know that he takes Lahore. He's practically invited in to push the Bangi Sardars out.
Yeah, so the citizens actually appealed to him to take over, and he takes over with very little resistance, isn't it? Exactly. Well, I mean, I read your catalogue last night, and just one thing I would say that I didn't know was that Tipu Sultan was involved in calling the Afghans and trying to. So when you think about it like that, you think you've got this 16-year-old, and you've got these two powerhouses who are trying to pincer this region, trying to establish almost Islamic rule back again over the subcontinent. And suddenly, like you said, most of the Sardars are sort of fleeing, and you've got the 16-year-old backed by Baba Sahib Singh just saying, "Well, no, thank you. I'm gonna stand here." And that one action alone leads to the rule.